Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Okay, so today I wanted to touch on addiction. I think I touched on it a little before, but I barely scratched the surface, and maybe today I'll talk about it a little bit more. Addiction is probably one of the biggest issues, and honestly one of the greatest forms of suffering that people deal with. Because addiction, what it feels like is you're in a constant state of how do I put it? It's like being a farmer and you're sowing seeds, putting something forth that you know is ultimately going to end up as a failed harvest. So you're constantly living in a state where you're just building brick by brick your house of regrets. And you almost feel compelled to do it. And you're literally just a slave to something that honestly you subscribe to as a means to take care of yourself, or to take care of a feeling in yourself that you couldn't take care of, or the people around you couldn't facilitate for you to take care of or process yourself. And so it's difficult. It's a symptom. It's not the cause, and it's super isolating too, because a lot of the times, sadly, people who struggle with addiction, the people in their lives villainized, for lack of a better word, they ostracize them, because it's like, oh, you're doing a bad thing, you're a bad person, get the hell out of here. But it's sad. It's sad because it's actually, if you look at it, almost the wrong way of doing the right thing, because someone's ultimately just trying to take care of themselves, and the result of someone who's taken care of is for them to produce the fruits that they are destined to produce, but they just don't have the right tools. They're using the wrong tools. So these are just some of the difficulties with this predicament one could find themselves in: addiction. Personally, in my life, I've struggled with addiction, and alhamdulillah, from one of the biggest things I was addicted to, I remember when I stopped, and I was fortunate enough for it to be cold turkey, and in big part I think it was because I was making the biggest decision of my life, because I was making the decision to become Muslim. And the thing is, you could be born Muslim, but it's when you're around that age of maturity where nobody's forcing you, where it really is then that you become Muslim. And it was around that time, and I said to myself, just actually before I found myself looking at the object of my turmoil, my addiction, and I was like, this is what I worship. I kept it real with myself. There's in psychotherapy, in being able to actually help yourself, initially there has to be, for most cases, a confession of sorts. And to myself, I was like, there's like the pre-ritual, there's the ritual in and of itself, there's the amount of times in the day that act as these pillars that if you don't have, what happens? Because I did try to stop. I did try to quit, before I even started practicing. And every time I did, the numbness would go away and reveal the feelings that I didn't know how to process, and I didn't know how to take care of. And yeah, I immediately just instantly depressed and instantly just jumping to suicidal ideation. And then you kind of ask yourself, you think about it in a way for people who struggle without the tools and the people around them to sort of guide them from this sort of turmoil. You know, is it like it's, I would never recommend it, but it's like, honestly, without this, without these without these without these means, you know, these false solutions, to, you know, in a way, you would completely fall apart. It's not really some excuse to go and harm yourself in that way, because no addiction ultimately leads to any sort of life worth having. But it's almost like, it's almost that, or like I explained to you, like a almost accelerated downward spiral. So with that being said, because of that big turning point I was gonna have in my life, and that thought sort of contemplating like that, yeah, like this is in fact, this right here is what I worship, and that being a prominent sort of thought just before those moments where, you know, I pray almost for the first time what it feels like, you know, that's what made a big shift for me in particular. And I'd say, because in some way I want to share, you know, a solution, some sort of practical way to put yourself in a position to, you know, leave these false solutions. The reality is, like I said, it is some sense of, it is some sort of, it's a form of worship in a sense. There's a reliance to this that you have. It's almost like your God, you know? And most people won't like to look at it that way, but in reality, you know, just think about it, you know, be as real as you can be with yourself. Like I said, confession is about the, it's only after you really confess where you can start to maybe get some sort of explanation and understand a little bit about yourself enough to actually then, you know, take the right course of action afterwards. Because when it was that clear, it kind of did put things in perspective enough for me to naturally take the next step and, you know, pray. With that being said, the way I look at addiction, when I reverse engineer my own life, it definitely had to do with the reframing. It ultimately stems to your identity. You know, who are you? If you know who you are, right, then ultimately at the core of who you are is an awareness. So who you are, who am I, what do I want? This attention and intention that you have. So where you see yourself like looking towards, whether it's, you know, physical or with your mind and with your spirit, what direction that you face in, and what you allow for your heart to say, you know, this is what I want, how do I, you know, what you tell your heart, you know, you want, you know, you have to sort these things out. So you have to know that just like this addiction, right? If you replace it with any of the other things in the worldly life, it'll always end up with the same result. So your intention has to be the character opposed to that, the person who doesn't need any of that. But you can't sustain that character long enough, because it does your intention and what you sort of cultivate in regards to the things that you hold. They only hold so much, or they're directly on an axis with what you give your attention to, right? So you have to know that, because the first step and a 3-step process that I would say to leave off an addiction would be support. But you need to cultivate a support system that isn't contingent upon something external to you, meaning you can't rely on anything external. And this is kind of what I was alluding to in regards to the things that you intend for yourself. Like, yes, discipline, sure, but we're humans, and it's imperative to know that the weak and the soft, or the ones who can admit their weakness and softness and need, are the ones who are going to succeed and overcome. So like how you are weak and you are soft and you submit to these addictions, you need to submit and give your attention towards God. You need to give your attention towards Allah. And these two things in conjunction, right? The kind of the character and discipline that you want to come with, on axis with the attention that you regularly and routinely give towards Allah, can put you in a position to be internally secure, free from having to externally outsource that thing that can keep you together, which ultimately won't keep you together, because it's only Allah, hence la ilaha illallah. So people think it's like gods are always going to be like stones, or maybe mythical things they've heard, like Greek gods and Egyptian gods, but it's not that. Or at least it's not only that. The object of worship could quite literally be anything, and worst of all, it could be your own self, what you want, right? And that could ultimately, anyways. So, but going to the person, let's say for example, who's struggling with addiction, you can't jump to that kind of internal positive feedback loop, that kind of relationship that you have with Allah. It's going to be very hard to be able to develop that, support system right away. Although it will develop, everything that gets built, every foundation starts off with one brick at a time. So you go forward with that, but you must find support in any way you can, whether it's a book or a person. I would say obviously people, and even if these people, they don't know, they're ignorant, as long as you try to find people who they love you, they genuinely love you, and lean on these people. But remember, ultimately lean on Allah, but find people to lean on that you could be honest with. And if like a lot of you have people, like for example in your life, that are like parents or guardians or siblings, that actually their attitude towards, and the taboo there may be towards the struggles that you are coming from, the darkness that you're trying to come from. You just have to be brave enough to like be open with them about it, because you have to ultimately have, or it's almost like it's very important that you can have that support. And I implore any parents that may be watching this, or people who have the attitude to like really hammer down the law, to know that if you're someone in your life reaches out to you for support, just offer that, because it's better that they can count on you, as opposed to them counting on some friends or people that don't actually care for them, and probably are going to end up landing them in a worse off situation. So let your kin and your folks and your people have you to count on. Sometimes it's not the most productive or constructive thing to try to hold somebody accountable, right? be like they're in sand. It could be really like someone is in quicksand, and once they found themselves in an inevitable situation, like, I mean, making a mistake as a human, it's like, in these kind of cases, they cannot get out except they just know how themselves, which is really hard, or they have somebody in their life like you, you know, a family or a good friend or guardian. So you have to, you know, their support has to be available in the kind of way where someone feels like, you know, safe and not judged. You know, humans, we're not logical creatures or rational creatures predominantly like we like to think. We're very emotional creatures, and we're very weak. And this is something stated by Allah in the Quran, that mankind was created weak. So you have to, you know, allow people to be able to lean on you, because it's imperative that they can have support. Without support, it's very, very difficult for someone to get out of the darkness of addiction. Now, the next step is alternatives, something tangible you can do or use in order to use in the time period where you are in withdrawal from whatever you are leaving. Because without that, it can be very, like I said, right? You can go, you're already going in a downward spiral as you are addicted to something, but once you like take away that substance or whatever it is that you're addicted to, you almost go down even faster, and it could quite literally feel like hell, to the point where you want to take your own life. So an alternative could play the role of like a break, but because of you being in this constructive process of leaving the addiction, you will ultimately be able to go back upwards, at least this time. And this kind of leads out into the last point, which is action, in the meaningful action, right? Working with what you have. Addiction is in a big way akin to lust. Lust has sexual connotations, but it's ultimately meaning like trying to live, utilizing or attempting to utilize what you don't have, you know? Whereas the opposite of that, your chastity, is working with what you have to make a good life for yourself and, you know, others, you know. So with that being said, you want to get to this point where the last level, where you take purposeful action that is in alignment with what you care about. And in this time period, you can busy yourself with discovering who you are, and what you have proclivities towards, what you're good at, what the world needs, even all of these things overlapping. And this could directly coincide with that action, like the action that you would take, that purposeful action. That's the only way you're going to not go back and slide back into that darkness of addiction. It's like you actually work towards like the opposite direction. You actually work, you know, because it is work in a sense. It's an upward spiral, but it's the good kind of work. And hence the purpose. If it's for a reason, you know, you won't mind any difficulty, right? If the why is strong enough, the how doesn't matter. So with that being said, to just sum up the video in short, I would say, if you know people who are struggling with things, even if they didn't quite reach addiction yet, know that it's a symptom, and there's a deeper cause, just something innocent that either you struggle with or something that maybe you don't struggle with, fortunately, but somebody else does. So the person in this case in your life need compassion and grace more than anything, so that they're quicker to leave or not ever even have to get to that level where they are addicted. And the next thing that I sort of brought up was the support, right? You have to cultivate a relationship with Allah internally so you could have a positive feedback loop. You don't have to feel like something outside of you is going to satisfy you, is going to give you purpose and meaning. Rather, you establish a relationship with Allah. And also, in regards to, externally, the people around you, you need to lean on them, and just sort of bypass any fears if you are dealing with people who find it really taboo to have any sort of struggle with substances or any sort of thing that is usually frowned upon, because it's more important that you're alive and well than you end up dying inside every day. So that's the case, and I know it's not the case with a lot of people. Just try to lean on the people who do care about you, or just find like those people that you can lean on, right? And there's alternatives. You have to find alternatives to whatever it is you're struggling with. And last but not least, taking the actions predicated upon who you are, because there is something that you have to give this world. At the end of the day, everybody has something that only they can bring, and it's up to you to find out what that is. And it's not really hiding from you. It wants you just as much as you want it. So with that being said, I'm gonna end the video here. Inshallah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.